Wow, that was epic. It was miserable and awesome all at the same time. Hello, this is Andrew with A1Million.Bike. Just doing a warm up for the Lowell Classic 50. Obviously, this is road. The gravel must be around here somewhere. The gravel mix seems to be mostly hard dirt roads with small pebbles. I found a video somebody made of a few years ago, or a year ago, I don't know, where they filmed the thing, and so you can kind of get a sense for the road conditions. I went with a wider tire this time around, mostly because it rained all day yesterday and into the night, and it's still super wet right now. Thermometer says 49 degrees, which maybe, yeah, I believe it, but it's the damp, cold. Oh, that should be about 10 degrees Celsius, I think. It's that damp cold that gets in your bones and makes me want to have a couple glasses of whiskey or a cup of tea, maybe. It is still pretty early, so maybe the tea. Anyway, got to get to it.
Thankfully, my second race went a lot better than the first. But before we get to that, massive thank you to the organizers of the Lowell Classic. They did a fantastic job with pretty much everything. I especially liked how they had marshals at most of the turns and police directing traffic at the major intersections. It was really nice to have that assurance, especially because there were large sections of the race where I couldn't read my computer. That's not to say it was flawless, just that they did a great job. Except with the start. But it's possible that that was more of a me problem. The Lowell Classic started exactly how I had expected the Snaggy Ridge to start, as a crazy, chaotic sprint. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, except that the way that they designed the route made it extra chaotic and potentially dangerous as people fought for position. I'll put a satellite photo up here of the start point, and so you can kind of see how it worked. Basically, it's two right turns as you come out of the lodge out to this major road, or relatively major road called McPherson Street. And so I was on the inside in the third or fourth row, kind of where you see the little A1Million logo, and the green line is obviously where the start line was. And so when they said go, everything went bonkers. And I wasn't prepared for how bonkers it went, but as I was coming out, I ended up getting chopped several times as I tried to get out to the road, through the route to the McPherson Street, and ended up getting pushed into a little ditch twice where I put the hand pointers. Now, I don't think that there were any crashes here, but that was more dumb luck than anything else. And I do think this is a valid criticism for the organizers. A short lead out, similar to how they managed it at the Snaggy Ridge, would have reduced the chaos and the potential for crashes, and it would have made for a much fairer start. I am willing to acknowledge that there could be some bias here on my part, because what that meant in practice was that I had already lost the race before we even went a quarter mile. By the time I got an outside line on McPherson Street, the front group was already well up the road. Now, obviously, I tried to catch them, but it was always going to be a losing proposition because they were both moving faster and they were just so far away. Fortunately, that section right there, when I got an outside line on McPherson Street, is a Strava segment. So it's really easy to see what the front group was doing relative to what I was doing, trying to catch them solo. And so it's pretty obvious. There's no way I was going to make up that mile and a 1.4 mile per hour difference, even if I kept going at what was a VO2 max effort for me. They were gone. But honestly, I was mostly okay with that. This was a very different race for me. And part of the reason why that is besides shifting my training plan based on what I experienced at Snaggy Ridge, which we'll go into a little bit more detail later, the other big change was around rethinking what my objectives were as a noob. After Snaggy Ridge, My friend, the Beast, sent me a link that his coach had sent him to a podcast where the guy who runs their coaching program was talking about how to set realistic goals at different experience levels in a race. And this guy has tons of racing experience, so it was both refreshing and disheartening to hear him talk about how to set personal objectives, personal goals, so that you don't tie your sense of winning or accomplishment in a race as a beginner to how you do at the end, like where you end up in the placement. So basically decoupling the winning in the general sense and winning in a personal sense. And it was really useful, really helpful. Basically, you have to set realistic goals and then iterate them to be consistent with your level of experience and fitness as a necessary step before even contemplating whether or not you can actually win or even do relatively well in a race, especially a race of this kind of scale. My big picture goals were to work hard and to finish well, in a personal sense. Like I wanted to make it, I wanted to do it without making any major mistakes, that kind of stuff. So achieving those meant that I shouldn't do what I tried to do at Snaggy Ridge, which was to bridge back to the front group solo. I already knew what could go wrong there, so I just didn't do that, and that was very helpful. So I slowed down, I joined a group, and I ended up riding with them all the way up to the last mile or so of the race. And it's not to say that I didn't do stupid things along the way. I probably didn't need to chase down as many rabbits who had fallen out of the front group, although that was really motivating. And I definitely didn't need to do as much work at the front as I did, but that wasn't entirely stupid. As I noted in the intro, it had rained all day Friday. The race was on Saturday, and it ended up pretty much raining the whole time we were on the course, which you could probably tell from the video at the very beginning of me at the end. Pretty much all of the non-paved roads, which is obviously the vast majority of the course, were just wrecked. It was like riding in sloppy peanut butter. The only time I wasn't getting sprayed in the face, eyes, and mouth with wet mud and sand was when I was in the front. So while it wasn't tactically smart to do as much work for the group as I did, part of the reason why I did it was that was really the only time I could see properly, and that I could breathe properly, and I could eat. And so I made a conscious decision to do more work than I probably should have done, because it just sucked so bad not being in the front. The conditions were brutal. Drafting was really difficult. And it became even more so around mile 30, where I just couldn't keep my glasses clean enough where it was safe. So I just had to take them off. Of course, that meant that the stuff that the glasses were stopping was now ending up in my eye. It's only now, 2 days later, where my right eye has kind of stopped being all red and swollen. In most scenarios, I was riding right to the left because of where the wind was coming. So all that stuff, the majority of the stuff was just coming up at the right side of my face. That decision probably cost me maybe around 3 or 4 places in my age group, because as it turned out, I was riding with quite a few of the 40 to 49 year olds. And that's the one regret that I have. About a mile from the end, as I was rolling off from a pull, one of the guys attacked on the last real hill. I didn't push hard enough to keep up with him. In the moment, I felt like I didn't want to deal with more mud and sand and stuff, and I knew that we were almost done, and I figured that I wasn't going to out sprint any of those guys anyway. But on reflection, I think I should have tried harder to stay with them and just dealt with it. I don't know if it would make any difference. I suspect that it wouldn't, because I suck as a sprinter, but it wouldn't be the niggle that it is to me now. Obviously, it would have been nice to have placed a little bit higher, But I also have to acknowledge that the conditions didn't really play well to my strengths as a cyclist, and that as a second race, especially in terrible conditions, getting 37 out of 134 is still a result that I can be happy with. Overall, I'm pleased with, in a general sense, obviously, I'm not pleased with everything, with the race that I rode. I felt good. I felt hydrated. I felt tactically I handled it much better, even though, I still made quite a few mistakes in that, most notably at the start. So what did I learn? The most important thing is to think about the line at the start. In this case, don't be on the inside. If I had started on the outside, I might have made the front group. Now, I probably wouldn't have been able to hang on with them until the end, given the conditions, but at least I would have made it to them and been able to find that out. And I probably would have learned more about racecraft if, instead of being one of the riders who was pushing the pace in the group that I was in, if I was one of the riders struggling to hang on to the front group. So obviously races are not group rides. I need to stop being everyone's domestique. This isn't a new thing that I learned. It's something that I need to actually digest and take on more. But it's really hard for me. It's such a fundamental mindset shift from the kind of rider that I am when I'm not racing to the kind of rider that I need to be when I am. Now, this is a weird one. I probably should have taped my brakes, or at least the rear brake. I saw someone at the start who had put a bit of duct tape over this spot on their rear brake caliper. At the time, I totally did not understand that. I just thought it was kind of weird. But about halfway through the race, my rear brakes were effectively useless. And the reason why was that so much grit had kind of gotten shoved into that space in the caliper that had ground away the pads. And so that they were pretty much ground to nothing. So the next time I do a muddy epic, and put some duct tape over that spot on the caliper. So this isn't really a thing that I learned. It's just something that is worth including here and noting here, is that it's super important to clean the bike when you're done, the whole bike. I found grit in everything. Headset, the free hub, behind the end caps on the wheels, and it had actually seized my seat post. So I'm really glad that I made it a priority when I got home to pretty much take the bike apart and do a complete service of everything. So seeing as this is my second race, I thought it was important to talk a little bit about why I think that it went better this time. The stuff that I kind of did right or learned from the previous one. Aside from the mentality shift that I mentioned before, the single biggest change was to my training plan. Stangy Ridge highlighted a deficiency in my fitness. I needed to get better at recovering at a tempo pace, or basically a pace that wasn't recovery. Where my focus before was pretty narrowly targeted at driving up VO2 max or threshold with big anaerobic efforts and a real recovery interval. Apparently, that doesn't cut it on many types of gravel surfaces. This came in especially handy because for this race, the road conditions were terrible, which meant that it was difficult to get a real draft, and the surface, this peanut butter surface, was just sucking so many watts out of the bike that you couldn't let off the pedals at all. So having focused on that kind of recovery over the last couple weeks came in incredibly handy. This is one of the more interesting differences I've noticed versus these more challenging gravel surfaces and the road, or gravel in Chicago. So aerodynamics, drafting, flat roads, and low rolling resistance were hiding this deficiency from me. Because of those things, when I wasn't working in a pack, it was very easy for me to do very little power and recover fully, go work, recover, go work, recover, and so on. Just keep doing that cycle. So the answer to, can I do this, was always yes. Do I have more? Yes. Where with these other road surfaces, that cycle wasn't available. I just couldn't do that. So I was never recovering. And so when I went for more, there wasn't more. Riding on these other surfaces, out in Iowa and now in Michigan, has made it obvious to me that this is a deficiency, a thing that was and still is a key area for improvement. I need to get better at recovering when I can't do recovery watts. So that's going to be a continued focus for my training plan. The other change worth noting is that given what happened with Nagy Ridge, I made a pre-race hydration plan. I don't know if being mindful around water and electrolyte intake had any meaningful impact, but I didn't have any of the cramping issues this time around. I felt well hydrated. I felt good for most of the race. So I'm going to count that as a success. Hopefully you found that this useful. If you did, go ahead and like the video. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below. I'll answer them as soon as I can. Thanks. Cheers.